when you couple the pressure you're getting from the public, along with when you look at, that January 16th through March 15th date range, and you think, man, we're usually at like 1% of our total kill count for the year is coming out of that season. Is it just not worth it? Did that come into play for the changes?
No, actually, as we look over time, the last couple of years, we've just seen, declining participation. And to me, that was the tipping point.
Happy New Year, everybody, and welcome back to the Drury Outdoors 100% Wild podcast, powered by Form Energy, Deercast, and a little hungover from Christmas meals.
Yeah, that's the best part of Christmas.
It is.
It is.
It really is. Yeah.
You're Tim Chelswick.
You're Matt Drury.
And we have a very special guest with us today.
Yeah, we got Jason Sumners, Executive Director of the Missouri Department of Conservation, and we're talking about the recent changes in the CWD landscape. And before people tune out and say, to heck with all the CWD stuff, there's some interesting discussions that are happening around this. So we just ask people to keep an open mind as we go forth and listen. We're not going to be talking about opinion. We're going to be talking about facts.
Well, I think we're going to be talking about some important changes that some people have been advocating for, and the MDC has listened to kind of the community at large and has made some changes. So, Jason, without further ado, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Happy to be with you guys.
Yeah, we appreciate your time. When you guys announce something like this, I know you get a lot of feedback, a lot of intense feedback, good and bad. And we've always enjoyed the open line of communication between the MDC and Drury Outdoors and this podcast, and giving you guys a platform to share your side of your reasoning and your message, and give you an opportunity to kind of convey that to the audience at large. And I know it comes with, I can only assume for you guys when you're making changes, it comes with a lot of strings attached, meaning there's going to be hate and there's going to be applause, and you got to kind of take all that feedback. I liken it to us putting a video up on YouTube or Facebook. You get good comments and you get bad comments. So how has the news been received so far? Take us through it. You guys had a conservation commission meeting in mid-December, and you kind of talked about some of these things and made some changes from there, or proposed changes. Why don't you start there and take us through everything?
Yeah, as you guys can appreciate, folks are passionate about the whitetail deer, right? Mm-hmm. And that goes both directions. And I think it comes out when we get comment from the public. And I just do sincerely appreciate the ability to come on and share some more about, the changes, because it certainly has raised a number of questions, and folks, jumped to their own conclusions one way or the other. Overall feedback is mixed. Like you said, folks who certainly very supportive of the change and been asking for something to look different, to folks who still remain concerned about what the agency's path is on CWD and CWD management, and folks who are concerned that with the pause of targeted removal, that we're taking our foot off the pedal, right? So we get those full range of comments. And yeah, I'm happy to have the opportunity to sort of walk through some of the conversations and the discussions that we've had. I think first we could probably just start with the kind of the regulation recommendations that were presented and initially approved by the commission. The primary ones were removal of the CWD portion of the firearms deer season. So for just the last couple of years, in an effort to kind of try to offer hunters additional opportunity to harvest deer inside the CWD management zone, we'd afforded 5 additional days of really an extension of the November portion effectively. Mm-hmm. The team, again, after a series of public meetings and a whole host of public input this last fall, recommended that we not continue that. And a big part of that is we hear feedback from other sportsmen and women who enjoy the outdoors, who are like, man, it's just another firearm season, which has a bunch of additional restrictions to small game hunting and all those kinds of things that when we looked at what the harvest totals have been for that portion, like, are we just shifting harvest out of the November portion? Are we just shifting harvest out of antler this season? And quite frankly, just complicating the lives of others who enjoy hunting in the outdoors. So that's why we chose to remove that portion. So folks won't see the CWD portion when we released the dates for the 26 hunting season.
So that, you mentioned the numbers, the totals of harvest totals. As I look through, one thing that I applaud you guys, you could go onto your website and you could see every detail you could ever imagine about the types of harvest, antler, antlerless, button bucks, CWD management, antlerless, youth season. Like, you could literally find any data and details that you want to find. And when you look through it, it really, that CWD, that extra 5 days really doesn't amount to a lot of extra harvest. And then we'll get into it in a minute here, I'm sure. But like that removal, the CWD management zones in that January 16th through March 15th, time frame that you guys are going to get rid of, it really doesn't amount to much either. Like, I look at like the alternative method season, you're looking at like 8,000 kills on average during that season. It's more than, I don't know. I look at all this and I understand especially if it's in one of your areas that you hunt, I understand the fire that people have about this conversation, right? But in the scheme of things, I've said it all along, like the totals just don't make sense to me as far as like why people as a whole are getting so upset, because there aren't that many deer being harvested during those specific seasons compared to the season at large, right? When you're talking 300,000 deer a year, roughly, or 275 or whatever the number is, and you're talking about 4,000 during this portion and 3,000 during that portion. I don't know. Is it just all optics at this point? Is that why people are so passionate about getting rid of those seasons?
Yeah. So I think, first off, I think there's some misunderstanding at the core, right? Like we've seen, growing misunderstanding of where, targeted removal activity is actually occurring. The number of letters of folks of, hey, deer population in X county has been destroyed because you've been slaughtering the deer by doing targeted culling. It's like, that's a county we're not even doing targeted culling in, right? Like, and we've got those maps up on our public website. So one of the things we have tried to do, to your point, Matt, of being transparent about the data, being transparent about how many deer are removed, that information is publicly available on our website. The deer harvest maps for the seasons themselves have been one of the things that have been up for a long time, right? That's where I go and check to see what harvest total is and what the trends are in various portions. And you can sort by county and you can get a lot of detail out of that. Over the last couple of years, our team has really put a lot of effort into providing a lot more detailed information related to CWD testing. So where is it happening? What test results do we have? What results are still pending, right? Like, here's the number that are pending. Here's the number of positives. To, again, try to share as much as that information as possible. And then that even being down to that much smaller scale of the core areas where these extra, more proactive management activities have been happening. And so, yeah, I think as we look over time, the last couple of years, we've just seen, declining participation. And to me, that was the tipping point, was that a couple of years ago, we've done everything we can to try to encourage, although we've clearly fallen short, harvest and active management for CWD during the regular hunting season. Like, we created very early on, when we initially found CWD in the free ranging herd and we started the more active management practices, we created CWD management seals. We afforded landowners really close to, within 1 mile, a 1 mile section around the CWD positive section, additional opportunity to harvest primarily bucks or additional antlerless deer during the hunting season. right? Like, how can we actively manage the disease together?
Mm-hmm.
And then the postseason removal work was, okay, what above and beyond that? But never with the desire to eliminate or eradicate the population. We also know it's extremely difficult, most likely impossible to eradicate CWD from the population once established, right? So that's never been the goal.
Jason?
But yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, is it possible the people that are writing in talking about, hey, I'm seeing less deer, it's because you guys are just coming in and slaughtering them. Is it possible that there are other entities that are doing culling, like municipalities that are maybe doing culling work that is outside of the scope or the purview of MDC? Do you guys have any visibility or awareness on that?
Yeah, so some of the St. Louis communities, a couple of them for a number of years, Town and Country being one of them, Wildwood more recently, have been contracting with sharpshooters during the winter months to actively remove deer for deer population management objectives.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's a scenario which, in some cases, we've encouraged additional hunter harvest. I mean, Wildwood's a place where our folks had worked with the community to get, and they've worked with a number of St. Louis communities to get archery hunting implemented, whether it's in the county parks, whether it's, the community feeling comfortable with, accumulation of landowners equaling some minimum acreage, allowing hunter harvest, right? Like, that's the way that we can sustain some of this deer management activity. So we've very much been active in attempting to help them address that problem with hunting first.
Yeah.
Well,
but also recognizing the scenario that that's not always what the community wants or desires. And so they've got a deer management challenge. And so they'll come to us and say, hey, we want to remove these animals via sharpshooters, which we then have to permit
and those
through an authorization.
Those totals go into the overall state total for the year, right? Like if they kill 250 deer, in a season in Town and Country, that 250 goes into the 275,000 number for the year, right?
If they're killed by a hunter during the regular hunting season.
So if they're killed by these groups that are permitted to come in and the sharpshooters, that those totals aren't accounted for?
No, because in most cases, those total numbers are very small and they don't really impact the management unit in which we're working with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
same happens with depredation permits, right? Like authorization to destroy deer. If a landowner's having crop damage, we and nearly every other state has a process to allow animals to be harvested when those impacts are happening. Again, relatively few deer actually get removed in that way, unless you have a really, really bad problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we've attempted to try to create landowner cooperatives, get folks to understand the impacts they're having on their neighbors, try to address those in a more sustainable path, which is why a few years ago we created the Deer Management Assistance Program, right? Which was an effort to say, okay, even the landowners don't want to shoot deer out of season. There's a universal norm. Nobody wants to shoot deer outside the regular hunting season.
Same.
We want to do everything we can to make that the most reasonable, sustainable path forward. And so we created the Deer Management Assistance Program to say, hey, we recognize that the statewide framework for bag limits and seasons doesn't necessarily meet the needs of some of these landowners. And so the DMAP program allowed us a mechanism to issue additional antlerless permits for folks to take during the antlerless portion of the deer season, during the firearms season. They can kind of decide who comes and goes from their farms, when and how those permits are distributed. So again, a huge step to try to work with folks to meet their local deer management needs.
And Mark was in the pilot program for that.
Yeah.
And Terry has participated in that, I think 2 seasons ago. It's a great program for those with high deer densities. And I don't even know that, probably not on Mark's case, but in Terry's case, they weren't even able to fill all the tags, between him and Forrest that they were allotted, for that time period. And you guys kind of do a study with trail camera, study, and you work with the landowner to make sure, you understand what that local kind of herd looks like and what the tag total should be. So it's not a set amount for all farm. It's not a certain amount that all farms get. It's based on, farm to farm, right? You guys, have somebody specifically going in and working with the landowner and looking at that. So it's a really interesting program that allows people with high deer densities to go try to manage the herd, because I hear and see a lot on social media like, oh, the MDC's decimated our deer and turkey population and small game and this and that. But there are areas that it is thriving. And a lot of times it's when you have landowners that are doing intense, management of their herd. So they're, planting crops and food for whitetails and native grasses and things of that nature to help all of their wildlife on their farms. And so there's areas where there is a high population. So I mean, you're trying to manage across an entire state, not just one area that may not be looking as good as another area.
Well, and if I'm playing devil's advocate, if I'm listening to the show and I hear that we're not counting deer killed by other entities that municipalities contract with, whether it's a large amount or a small amount, if I'm playing devil's advocate, I'm saying, well, we're talking about the same deer herd. Like, we're talking about a finite number of deer that all live on the landscape. And so we have this variable X that's being taken out. Why aren't we counting that? So, like, in terms of optics, I could see where that would trip some people up and say,
people even really knew that was a thing, though. You know what I mean? I don't know that most people even know that that's the case.
Yeah, it's deer hunting is so like Jason, like you said, deer hunting is such a personal thing. We all have such an affinity for it. If the hunting near you is not great, it doesn't matter what the rest of the state looks like. All of a sudden, terrible. It's like,
for instance, I have a farm that the turkey population it's non-existent. All right.
Did you let Mark come through?
No, but it's a new farm for me. But I have farms that I lease that it's totally exploded. I'll see 40, 50 turkeys, on trail camera, and Mark and Terry's places. They have a lot of birds, but they've done a lot of, practices to, try to work on predation and all that kind of stuff and habitat and all that. So, if I only had the one farm to hunt and not the ones I lease, I would think, turkeys, man, there's no turkeys. There are no turkeys in the state. But by kind of knowing the landscape of certain areas of the state, and a lot of people I talk to, it's like, man, there's more turkeys than we've had in years, and so it is, I think, nature, your human nature to say, this is how it's affecting me. But when you look at a larger scale, I mean, it is not that way. I mean, it's amazing the amount of things that come up in my Facebook feed of
model railroad stuff.
Yes, and people being like, stuff about CWD. And you and Jim Richmond and I pass it along and look at some of this stuff. And it's like, man, I've hunted all. I saw one. I don't know who the person was. I'm sorry. I credit it if I remembered it. But I hunt all over the state, have my entire life. And the deer and turkey population is not near what it used to be. And the MDC has totally ruined it. And I don't understand that conversation. I would understand a guy being upset if they were in the hot zone of a CWD area and there was targeted removal of this core area and there's landowners all around your farm and there were, 100 deer taken out. Yes, that would adversely affect your hunting. I would imagine it would, it'd be very hard to come back from that. Mm-hmm. Unlike EHD, if EHD wipes out your area 4 or 5 years, you're going to start seeing the deer herd come back. And frankly, the buck population probably your buck's looking a little bit bigger because there's less stress, all kinds of stuff that goes into that. But if you're in a core area where deer have been targeted to be removed, I could see where those people have a legitimate complaint as of, man, the MDC came in and now my deer herd is, I'm not seeing deer. That's about the only way I could see this affecting a certain person. But in general, from a state perspective, you look at the kill numbers, they're about the same every year. They don't move one way or the other very much. And when you look at the CWD, it's like 1%, 1.5%, 1.02%. Like the number of CWD like tag or kills after the season That's the amount we're talking out of the entire deer herd population for the year. Like those are like that's basically ineffective the way I look at it. What, Jason, when you guys looked at that, did that have any effect when you couple the pressure you're getting from the public, along with when you look at, that January 16th through March 15th date range, and you think, man, we're usually at like 1% of our total kill count for the year is coming out of that season. Is it just not worth it? Did that come into play for the changes?
No, actually, that's not sort of the calculation, I guess. And I'll take a step back to some of the things you're talking about in terms of long-term trends and patterns of deer harvest. We probably need to have about 1.5 million deer to consistently sustain a harvest with the same sort of sex ratio that we have of nearly 300,000 deer, right? So if the population was on decline, we wouldn't be able to sustain those numbers. And so all of our data would suggest that in most places we've sustained that. There's absolutely some parts of the state, far northwest Missouri being a perfect example, in which we had really high deer populations back in the early 2000s with the loss of CRP acres, with the loss of fence rows, the loss of habitat. There aren't nearly as many deer in that landscape unless there's a group of larger landowners working together that have enough habitat still protected. Like that's completely a habitat driven thing. But for the most part, deer populations are pretty good across the state. Yeah, you're right. So when we look back through time since 2012, the postseason targeted removal work has removed about 27,000 deer. And certainly that the area in which that removal work has happened has increased. The number of deer that have been removed has increased. The first couple of years we would have been removing 500 to 700 deer probably. Last year it was 4,700 deer. Mm-hmm. Again, through that time, to your point, Matt, hunters have removed about 3.7 million deer. And so on a local scale, absolutely, yeah, there's no doubt it is in some cases impacted folks' local deer population, but we're talking 1 or 2 square miles around, a core area at the very beginning was the CWD positive section that was found in. So 1 square mile. And we would buffer that by a set of sections. So 3 miles by 3 miles is the area in which, if you had a single positive section, targeted removal would occur. Now, how does that work? Basically, we reach out to landowners in that area and we say, hey, we found CWD. Our best opportunity to attack this disease is at very early stages when prevalence is really low and you have relatively few deer on the landscape. So you would hope that, one, the removal number is very small and that the number of positives are very small. So what we're learning is that there's a tipping point, that once local prevalence reaches about 5%, somewhere between 5 and 7, maybe 5 and 10%, prevalence rates accelerate rapidly. And this is played out in Alberta. This is played out in Wisconsin. It likely would have played out in Arkansas had we been able to detect it early, had it been detected early enough that they could have recreated it. And honestly, I think it's playing out probably in St. John County right now, that core area, or likely really close to it. So you want to get in, you want to try to remove as the females, primarily females, but absolutely bucks too, that are in those social groups where a positive individual has been infected. And so our effort has always been very, very small. And when you look at it at a countywide scale, it's still not having an impact on countywide harvest totals. So that's the way it works. And so we certainly hear the criticisms about, yeah, but 1/10 of 1% of the deer testing positive that you test, that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. That is a good thing in that it is not at that point at which it is accelerating rapidly. The problem with CWD, and Illinois has been in this management approach for a long time as well, is that it continues to spread. Yeah. Right? Like the frequency of the disease is we've been able to, with the work of landowners, keep prevalence relatively low where there's good participation, but the disease continues to spread. So that's the challenge. So what did we see? Why the pause? So I made the call, earlier this month to pause our winter target removal operations. That's a policy decision in which, when you look at it, yeah, sure, there's pushback, right? Like, folks don't like it. Nobody likes it. We've never liked it, right? Like, I've never been super comfortable with this idea that we'd be shooting deer outside the season. That's not the core of like what I want to do, but we need to take active management to try to minimize the prevalence of the disease, keep as many infections off the landscape. But over the last couple of years, we just had a declining number of landowners in a core area that want to participate, right? Like, the number of those, every time we find a positive, you'd get a group of landowners really interested in working together, doing additional removals, and then through time that quickly declines. And so our team had taken a step back 2 years ago, and they said, let's try something different. Let's do what we're going to pilot as a hunter harvest initiative, kind of like we piloted DMAP. And they picked out 4 areas, and they said, okay, we're going to pick these 4 core areas. We're going to go in, we're going to have conversation with landowners, and we're going to set a deer management target. Again, like we did with Deer Map, and say, hey, you need to remove these many does. We think we need this many deer removed during the hunting season based on local population trends, based on local harvest rates. And we set a goal. And throughout the hunting season, we got them to report the deer, we got them to sample the deer, and they told us how many. In a couple of cases, we hit that target. And we're like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
What did we learn from it? A couple of places we didn't. Well, then this fall, we decided, okay, let's take what we learned. Let's expand that out to 19 areas. So throughout the summer and early fall, staff went and met with landowners in these local areas and said, hey, let's try this together, right? Let's figure out how we can work together to meet some of these targets, to meet some of these objectives. Because we don't want to do postseason removals, right? Like, but we know not managing the population isn't going to allow us to be successful. So we got through the vast majority of the hunting seasons when most of the deer were going to be taken. And we looked at those numbers and that participation rate, and it wasn't very good, which told me we had a problem, right? Like, we needed to take a pause, take a step back, reassess where we were, because clearly even the in-season incentives of attempting to get sampling done, providing opportunities for sampling done, providing a target, right? Like, there's some other barriers standing in the way of this management occurring.
Yeah.
And so throwing targeted removals on top of that was not going to be a strategy that was going to make us successful. And again, continue to maintain and build sort of that collaborative relationship with our hunters and our landowners to be successful. So that's the reason the pause happened, until we can devise a strategy in which we determine what works for folks, right? Like, this isn't us casting out some predefined outcome. It's like, we need to figure it out together. And so what does that look like? So our team's going to spend the next several months, the next several years, quite honestly. I mean, this isn't going away. We can't wish CWD away. I wish we could, but we can't.
Yeah. Well, this is what I like about what the Wildwood Conservation Alliance is doing here in Missouri. I've been talking with some of the guys on that leadership team. And for those who don't know, Wildwood is it's a rural suburb of St. Louis. It's I think the largest county, or the largest township in Missouri by square mileage, but it's not very highly populated. Most people live on 3+ acres of ground. There's a lot of suburban bow hunting that happens out there. But they were contracting with a third party to come in and kill deer, and it was for a lot of money for very few deer. And just the fiscally conservative citizens were like, "Holy heck, we're paying."
It was about $1,000 a deer.
Yeah, conservatively, yeah. I think it was like $1,200 a deer or something. And they instead of complaining, they took matters into their own hands. They're like, let's get the best kind of in real time deer sampling study that we can. Let's try to figure out exactly what's on the landscape, and then let's have hunters sign up and commit to taking a certain number. I think it was like 6 or 8 does per season. And I know a lot of people from across the country have been reaching out to those guys in leadership asking, okay, how do we institute that model here near us? And that's where it's like, you don't need to wait for legislators to make decisions as long as you're working within the law. And where we live, you can buy unlimited doe tags during archery season.
Yeah.
And so how do you do that? And how do you, because, and I told the guys, I was like, this is great, but these guys that sign up, and I didn't sign up because I have a hard enough time trying to kill the deer I kill. I can't commit to killing 8 does. But the guys that do, I really hope they do, because this is kind of a make or break thing. The model only works if people show up and truly do what they say they're going to do, because part of this issue with carrying capacity and numbers exceeding a healthy limit for the landscape is on us as deer hunters that in some instances probably aren't taking as many deer as we should.
Oh, no doubt. For sure. I mean, I know a lease that I have, the land, or the farmer who leases that ground, he's had several conversations. He used to have depredation tags. This is years, probably 15 years ago, before I was on the lease. And he's like, you guys aren't killing enough deer. It's like, man, we're trying. It's not for a lack of trying, but I'm a shitty hunter. No. Yeah. So this year I think we've killed 5 does and 1 buck off of it, but in his eyes, that's not enough. We need to kill 15 but he's a farmer and his objective is different than my objective of trying to manage the entire herd, so I don't know, you run into that kind of stuff as well. But going back to the CWD management, the management zones, Jason. So when you guys, do you get any kind, this is one of the things you see on social media a lot, so I want to give you a chance to talk about it. Was there any pressure from say the governor or from this person or that or a state representative that they come to you guys at the commission and say, look, I'm getting so much feedback from my constituents. We got to do something about this, CWD management zone.
Yeah, I'm aware of some of those rumors that popped up, and it couldn't be farther from the truth. Like, it was literally our leadership team sitting down and saying, man, should we continue this? Right? Like, because we're in the moments of staff starting to contact landowners to initiate the next stage of winter operations. And I'm like, I don't think we're ready, guys. So no, there wasn't necessarily any like higher authority that swooped in and told the commission what to do or told me what to do. It was an agency conversation as to what the right thing to do was. Of course, we get feedback from everybody, right? Like, if anybody has an opinion on deer and deer management, they're going to share it with us. And that's completely normal, just like any member of the public. So yeah, we'll meet with legislators. We'll meet with, whomever, various interest groups. I have numerous meetings with a whole wide suite of interest groups throughout the year, getting feedback on our deer management and our wildlife management in general. So no, there wasn't some other outside force that suggested we needed to do something different.
Because if Kehoe's bothering you, we can call him. We did help get him elected. Just say, hey, Mike, gotta lay off Jason, man.
You call him Mike?
Oh, yeah.
I called him Your Excellency, and he was like, no, that's the wrong thing.
Yeah. But no, I just, and the whole thing of, there's a vote coming up this year, and these guys are just doing it to make sure they continue to get the funding. And it's like, no, that's inaccurate as well. It's not totally accurate as to what they were talking about. It's just amazing to me, the amount of things that have popped up as to, I saw somebody say, oh, you got to read between the lines there. They added a youth season. It's like, no, that youth season was there. I mean, how many years have you guys done that second youth season?
I don't know. It's been around since like shortly after I started with the department. So 12 or 15 years at least.
That's the thing. It's just like, it's such a hot topic that they want to have it's gotcha politics with deer hunting is what it is. It's like, oh no, they're going to do this now. And it's like, look, I mean, the season dates have pretty much been around the way they've been around for a long time. And the doe, the antlerless season kind of gets moved around a little bit. That's been, it used to be late season. It used to be like late season, and then it kind of moved out for a little bit and then back into the early season. Like that one's moved around a little bit, hasn't it? But other than that, the rest have been kind of consistent.
Yeah, the antlerless portions have moved around some, over the last 15 or 20 years. We created the new early antlerless portion, which has been really popular, and I think actually has been an add to, deer harvest at a time when folks are interested. So let's just go out and shoot a couple does, get some meat in the freezer. Gonna use the November portion during the rut for buck hunting. The later antlerless has just kind of been what it's been. We did shortly after the massive EHD outbreak in 2012, followed by years of really high doe harvest. We shortened the late antlerless portion down to 3 days, right, to let populations recover. So we made those changes through time. It, like you said, Matt, it used to be back in early January.
Yeah.
And the muzzleloader portion was in early December based on feedback from hunters, right? A lot of feedback from hunters are like, we desire some of that later season. And I mean, you got to push it back a ways in Missouri for it to be really late season kind of deer hunting experience. And so we put it between the Christmas and New Year's timeframe, really based on hunter desires and feedback from that standpoint. So those things have juggled back and forth. I do want to sort of address a couple of, pieces of misinformation about the winter operations that is floating around there, is that it's a completely voluntary program, right? When we approach a landowner, it's, do you want to participate? Yes or no? If it's no, okay, we might seek to understand why they don't want to, try to help build some understanding. There's no strong arming. There's no pressure, right? Like, we certainly want as many folks to participate as possible, but not everybody does. If yes, you do want to participate, then the first is, you guys want to do it yourselves, right? Like, more than happy to provide the authorization for you and whoever you want to come have that opportunity during a specific time frame. And a small portion of folks say, yeah, we're willing to do that. And we've got some core areas where a large percentage of the landowners are the ones that say, yeah, we'll do that. And they actually actively do it. But then in most places, man, it's cold. It's absolutely miserable conditions then our staff go out and do it. But all those limits that are placed, all the quotas are largely driven by the landowner. If they say, hey, don't shoot bucks, shoot 5 deer and be done. Like, okay. That's what we've worked out, right? Like, this isn't, or they'll say, how many do you think we should, right? And so then we'll be a little more open to removing larger numbers of deer. Again, context specific. If it's a really large landowner that didn't get a lot of deer shot during the hunting season, they may actually want and or need more deer removed. And so again, it attempts to be adaptive in that approach. Then what happens to the deer? So those deer that are harvested we collect them all up. We take them to a local meat processor. All those deer are tested. Those in which CWD is not detected, so you get a negative test result. They're all processed, and then they're either given back to the landowner or they go to a food bank. So they get donated through the Share the Harvest program. So none of those deer are wasted.
And that's the majority of the deer. I mean, based on your positive, 1% positive rate of tests during that portion. The majority of them are being donated to Share the Harvest or back to the landowner.
Yeah. Yep.
And that low prevalence rate, that argument is one that drives me nuts, because I see people complaining about the low prevalence rate.
Why are we doing this? It's only 1%.
But they're the same people who also say that CWD doesn't exist. And they're complaining about the low prevalence rate. So it's like, well, it doesn't exist in your mind. So I don't know how you could be upset about numbers that don't make any sense, because this thing apparently doesn't exist. And would it make you happier if it was 10%?
In which case we'd have a real problem.
The idea is that you want a low prevalence rate because that indicates that that there's not the spread isn't happening as rapidly as.
So
to address that, Tim, one of the things we've been working on, and I hope, this winter when we get to go back out to some of these landowners that have been participating in the Hunter Harvest Initiative, we've been working on some models that actually demonstrate what would have happened had we not removed the additional deer, right? What would prevalence rate look like had we not removed additional deer? Or what's prevalence rates trending in this local area? Because we got some places where it's trending up, and it's trending up because we haven't had kind of that added pressure.
Yep.
And so prevalence rates look really different. And the opposite, the reality is what we hear from folks who don't believe the disease is real or have question about it. There's also a group who say, well, if infection rates were higher, then we'd feel comfortable doing something.
Yeah.
And it's the hard part of like at that point, then it becomes too far. It's gone too far for us to actually meaningfully do something. And I hate to use human-based analogies and nasty things, but we think about cancer, right? Like we do all this cancer screening to try to detect the disease as early as possible, try to do as minimal, as least invasive, as quick of intervention as possible, right? You'd rather treat cancer when it's at stage 1 and not at stage 4.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what this really is. It's like a proactive attempt to minimize the downstream negative consequences. I understand that one of the negative consequences of us detecting CWD on your farm or a farm close by is the perceptions that come along with that and the fears of what's going to happen. The concern is that is a very short time frame in which you're not looking out 15 years into the future, in which we have landowners. And I've received a few emails from landowners in Wisconsin that said, hey, we're happy to come tell our story, right? Like we now see lots of sick deer on the landscape. We don't have the number of adult bucks in the population. So we're certainly there's some concern about, the value of land and all those kinds of things in the short term from an initial CWD detection versus the value of the land in the long term when it's become heavily infected and this critter, the white-tailed deer that we care so much about, now doesn't have the same value as it did previously.
Yep.
So there's a lot of things really wrapped up in trying to navigate the way people feel about this disease and the response.
Wisconsin's interesting because I've seen people use it for an argument both ways. Like, oh, if you look at it, it hasn't affected it at all. The deer numbers are still, the overall herd carrying capacity is still high. But then I hear, from specific landowners like you're talking about, or from you guys using some of that science and saying, no, the age limit that they get to a buck, it might be 3 years old now instead of 6 or whatever the case may be. Like that you see them they kind of die off sooner than they used to die off. But like I said, I see the people that are totally against CWD use Wisconsin as an example of, once they finally quit doing the targeted removal, the population's the same as it always was. What is the truth there?
It's extremely scale dependent. And when I say scale, I mean the size of the area in which you look, right? You can blow regional or statewide harvest totals and trends in Wisconsin up to a scale large enough to mask any localized impacts that are happening. Right? This is a disease in which it is directly transmitted from deer to deer, right? So prevalence builds in a small, very small area and then slowly diffuses out. And so those impacts are going to happen at a much smaller, much more localized scale. I think what is also very true is the dynamic of the disease is going to play out differently in areas with different productivity, right? So like different survival rates, different harvest pressures, different fawn recruitment that results from that, like different background habitat management, historic structure of the population before the disease sort of set in, some of those patterns that fall out. So I think you're going to see it, just the nature of all these variables that likely determine the distribution of deer numbers as well as prevalence of the disease is going to play out slightly differently. But it just takes a long time for the disease to accumulate to the point where it does become the dominant factor. But it does. And there is data that suggests that. So folks who say that there's no scientific data to suggest that CWD has ever impacted a population are ignoring papers that have been published from the West and the recent results from the Arkansas study and the recent results that have not yet been published but are in their report from Wisconsin. It's there.
I saw a pretty reputable outdoor brands podcast have a guy on who went as far as I've seen anyone go in this conversation to say that prions don't exist. That prions have never been scientifically proven to exist. And I was like, wow, and it's like, I don't know, some 20, 30 something year old guy that he wasn't a microbiologist. He wasn't an epidemiologist. He was just some guy that really liked the deer hunt. But I was like, okay, this has gone a bridge too far.
I want to ask you, so you brought up St. Genevieve County. We've talked about it every time you've been on the podcast because where Mark, Terry, and myself are originally from. So in that county where it's a hot spot, if, we're going to get rid of this CWD management zone or put a pause on it for now. If you guys continue to do nothing in a county like that, where it's a little bit of a hot spot, what kind of outlook does that have in 20 years? Or, I know this is hypothetical, but if you follow that data and science from Wisconsin or Arkansas, like what does that look like for a hotspot county that we know there's a little bit higher positive rate in that county already?
Yeah. So if we look at the examples of other places where the disease has been present and followed sort of that same trajectory, you'd expect that and I don't know exactly what the prevalence rates are in St. John County, but at the county level, if they're 2 or 3%, I think you can reasonably expect that in 10 years, that will be at 15 or 20.
Which at that case, in that case, what's the next step at a 15 or 20% based on data from other states over the last 20, 25 years that we now have it? What's that look like as far as the deer herd for that county?
Yeah. So and this is where it's remarkably similar. It's quite amazing. The data in Wisconsin, the data out of Arkansas, and a study that was completed 7 or 8 years ago in eastern Wyoming all indicate that once adult female prevalence passes about 25 to 30%, that range, one of them said 27, one of them said 29. I think the Wyoming one was like 25, right? A less productive system. That population, the resulting mortality from CWD will result in a population that is no longer increasing. So a no longer increasing population means that we shoot this harvestable surplus, right? Like they're no longer replacing themselves.
So if you were to kill...
So if you shoot more does, you just have fewer deer.
Yeah.
And that's where Arkansas's data, and I've talked to them numerous times, right? Like, how do you understand this? What do you think's going on? What's driving it? What's recruitment look like? How are these other factors playing in? They believe their population is declining in the neighborhood of 13 to 14% in the real hottest core area that they have around the original detection.
To me, that's the most alarming data.
That's practical.
That's practical.
Yeah.
I mean,
a real application.
But because as a state, we've done such a good job of curtailing the positives by management. We haven't had to deal with this yet. But if you let it just run loose, that's what can happen.
Even what Jason just said, there's a margin there, because I think, Jason, what you're saying is that there are populations in areas of Arkansas that are not replacing themselves. Is that right? So it's not a statewide thing. So someone up here in Mountain Home may be seeing something down here different in Little Rock. And again, like if I'm seeing plenty of deer in Little Rock,
townships, right? Like if you want to, again, that's why I said this stuff is so scale dependent. Those who want to dispute the whole thing can blow it up to a scale in which they can blur the lines of what might be happening locally. And again, not saying it's going to play out the same everywhere, but the area in Arkansas is relatively small. Right. I think if they drew a circle around it, it'd be less, it'd be half a county at this time. But that is going to continue to slowly grow as it smolders out.
And that I think maybe one of the toughest nuts to crack in this entire conversation is how do you get people to care about something that's not yet impacting them, that they're not personally seeing the evidence of.
And that's been the struggle. We've known that from the very beginning, right? We're dealing with something that happens really slow. We can't see it. It's really challenging to get the community to take action, right? Those are the exact same things you're describing, Tim. And it is rife for then folks coming up with alternative motives, alternative scenarios in which this plays out. But where I want to stay at is the conversation of the disease is real. We have evidence that shows it does impact populations once it reaches a critical kind of tipping point. We know we're in this long-term, like we need to figure out how to manage deer populations in the presence of CWD. And that doesn't mean doing nothing, right? And that's not what we're suggesting either. What we're saying is we know this one tool, winter operations, is a lightning rod. We also know that in general, folks there's something about sort of taking proactive actions to minimize the spread of the disease folks aren't comfortable with.
Yeah.
So how do we work together to figure out what it is we do want in the future of this deer herd? And we've tried to develop some modeling tools that will hopefully help us even better understand what a long-term harvest strategy might look like to try to manage this disease.
Well, I really hope this Wildwood experiment works out. And I know that people from across the country are reaching out to these guys and they're talking about doing some consulting to figure out how to export the model because it's not super complicated. And Wildwood is an interesting place because it's a politically more kind of center left-ish. So you have a general kind of built-in suspicion of hunting and hunters, and they were able to get this done in a place that's not super friendly to hunting. So if we're looking at like most of the people that listen to our show are kind of limited government, pick yourself up by your bootstraps kind of people, this could be a way of hunters taking more control over kind of the destiny of hunting and the future of hunting and management and the responsibilities that we have.
Well, I think to that point, I think hunters, you're saying participation had gone down in that late, winter management. And I think that was hunters voicing their opinions of what they thought of that lightning rod of a season. It's like, look, we don't agree with this. We're not going to participate in it. So, okay. So you guys listened, you're putting a pause on it. Which, by the way, articulate what that means, putting a pause on it, because that's one of the other things that you're saying, like, oh wait, this is just the fine print here. It's going to pick back up at a certain point. Do you want to discuss that any further? What's that mean? Putting a pause on it just for now, for 5 years, for 2 years, for what's that look like?
It's suspended indefinitely, right? Like, I don't want to say that it's a tool that works, and I'm not willing to take that tool out of the toolbox yet. Mm-hmm. But also, it's not going to happen anytime soon either until we figure out what a path forward looks like with a group of local hunters and landowners. Because, I think, Tim, the Wildwood's a good example of like, let's figure out how we collaboratively work together. Let's set some clear objectives and figure out how that can be executed. These are all things that are really outside of the realm of the regulation framework in terms of you have the ability to do it. We provide the tools and the opportunity, right? Like what does that, figuring out what that better objective looks like? Are there other things that we could modify, right? Like we've heard a lot from hunters that like, man, I'd shoot more deer, it's so hard to get a doe processed, right? Like, what do I do? So we've actually created a term position to look at expanding the share of the harvest program to make it easier for hunters to donate meat, to make the program more consistent, to try to figure out better ways that they're able to sort of satisfy some of those challenges that they face from a real deer management standpoint. And again, it's some of these folks who know they do need to remove more deer, but what do they do with them?
You're a better man
Right?
than I am. I would have told him quit being a baby and just do it yourself.
Not everybody has a good place to do it, Tim.
As long as you got a garage.
Okay, easy.
Or a tree. If you got a tree, you're
not everybody's
you're in
rich like you and
business.
has a garage and a tree.
Well, I agree with part of that statement.
There's no room for compromise in your hunting knife. That's why Cold Steel has built a reputation for crafting the toughest, most reliable blades on the planet. From the versatile click and cut to the innovative hunting kit, every Cold Steel knife is a tool that you can trust. Strong, durable, ready for anything. Get yours today at coldsteel.com and experience the difference for yourself. Okay, so I want to. I know we've gone long here, but it's all been good stuff. I want to cover a couple more quick topics. Removal of antler point restriction. Some people, which I would tend to agree with this. I would rather have an antler point restriction. In some counties, like they've seen strides in their deer herd and population and the bucks because of it. What's the thought process there? You're just trying to make it more liberal. We're getting rid of this late season CWD thing, so we're gonna get rid of the antler point restriction and kind of open season on any buck. Is that the general idea behind of it?
Yeah, I mean the antler point restriction. Yeah, it protects young bucks from harvest, and we know young bucks disperse. We know they play a significant role in the spread and prevalence of CWD, right? And so we found ourselves in a spot where prior to the season, we had 18 counties that were left with the antler point restriction. So as a county had tested positive or a neighboring county real close by tested positive, we'd remove the antler point restriction. Mm-hmm. And in fact, with a few of the recent positive detections, that number was going to shrink even further. So we continue to find and detect the disease sort of at the periphery of where we found it before, detect new counties. So it just made sense to not continue to have a regulation in place that said, hey, you can't shoot young bucks, knowing that they do and can spread the disease. Again, we're not telling folks they have to, right?
Yeah, it's your choice.
You have to shoot.
You can shoot a spike if you want to, buddy. Meat hunter.
Game officer be like,
from a
you saw a deer.
Yep. From a regulatory standpoint, it was irresponsible for us to continue to have a regulation in place that prohibited that from occurring.
Okay. All right. So that's one. Number two here. The gun season. This is a forever topic. The general firearm season being kind of in the rut period there, November 14th through the 24th for this next year. Is there ever discussions had regarding moving that back a week?
There's always discussions of moving the November portion. And every time we've asked it, yes, there is a group of folks who are extremely passionate about pushing the season back. There's a equally or larger group of people who are extremely passionate about leaving it absolutely where it is.
Because of their tradition or what, what's.
Yeah, because of the tradition. And then I think, many argue that, it is certainly the time in which deer are most active. And so why would we not want, most of our hunters in the woods when deer are most active and they're going to have the best experience, right? So I think that's an equally compelling argument. It really gets down to what is, the agency's responsibility of managing the deer herd, right? Like, who are we managing it for and under what conditions? Honestly, we're managing for a sustainable population of deer that attempts to minimize the negative impacts, but there's enough deer where others can use and enjoy them. The bounds in which, that creates a population with a lot of giant bucks or it doesn't create a population with a lot of giant bucks, I think is a spot where it's really difficult to say whose viewpoint or whose perspective on what their interpretation of what a quality or healthy population looks like. So it's a really tough spot in terms of providing folks opportunity to hunt and enjoy the resource versus a segment of the community who very much would desire to have an older age structure, bucks, more large mature bucks to shoot. So yeah, it's always an ongoing and hot topic of conversation.
I think, most people look across the landscape and you look at Iowa, Kansas, Illinois, which is right border us, right? And you're looking like, well, their seasons are later, and especially Illinois and Iowa, it's they don't even have a quote unquote rifle, season. They have, straight wall cartridges and stuff like that now. But I think they look at how little habitat they have in those states versus Missouri, but yet the quality of age structure of antler deer. And that's always the argument to play off of the firearm season being where it's at. The non-resident system in place. You guys are making some changes on the turkey side. Is it going from 2 bearded turkeys down to 1 coming up this coming season? So
which will impact how many people I don't most know. People shoot 1 bird.
Yeah. I don't know what the data is, but I would think there are several out-of-staters that would come to Missouri to probably hunt the turn there of week 1 and 2, where then you can get 2 birds, at that certain date, or that would be my assumption. As you as a non-resident, I would come, if I were to come here to Missouri, I would come where now I could kill the 2 birds. So that goes away. But I think you often hear people have the argument in state, residents of why aren't we reciprocal with our costs or with a draw system, or, making it a little bit tougher for non-residents to get deer permits in the state. What say you, Jason?
Yeah. So the turkey one specifically, you're right, Matt, in terms of they show up the first weekend. That way they can, as soon as Monday rolls around, they can harvest the second bird. Mm-hmm. Non-residents do harvest that have a slightly higher percentage that harvest the second bird than resident hunters, but not much. But what they do after they shoot the first bird is they definitely stick around, right? Like, we're going to give the opportunity to shoot the first bird, and then they're going to go home. So I think that while numerically it won't have a huge impact on harvest, it will have an impact on the thing we hear most from Missouri residents, which is interference, right?
On public lands.
Like, they're on public land, they're continuing to interfere. And so if they've still got the opportunity to shoot a second turkey, they may not shoot a second turkey, but they're still out there trying, right? And so I think that absolutely will have an impact on the number of days hunted. Now, for non-resident deer hunters, in the 2010, 2012 kind of time frame, we were setting around 25,000 non-resident deer hunters, and that number had been stable for some time. It had slowly trickled up, but really since around 2015, year over year, it is increased to the point where now I think last year, all total, there were 45,000 non-resident firearms deer hunters, which is a pretty substantial increase, right?
Yeah.
And so we fully recognize that. And we're gonna, and have been asking some questions. We're gonna do a deeper dive into what might it look like, right? Some of the initial, kind of thoughts were, we got overall declining hunter numbers. We need not mess that up too much. Non-residents are helping, but they're coming to shoot a buck, right? They're not necessarily coming to help shoot does. And so there's, economic implications. Many of our small rural communities certainly rely on the economic input that non-residents put into the system. And so it is a really complicated kind of conversation. But we do fully intend to have, ongoing discussion because, we recognize it. And especially when you get north of the Missouri River, right? That's the place where most folks want to hunt. The other thing that gets lost on people, and again, I don't know if it's a chicken and the egg kind of scenario, but we also have about twice as many hunters as all of our neighboring states, right? Like, we got more habitat. We got a lot more hunters. Do we have a lot more hunters because we've been letting them hunt with a rifle during the most exciting time of the year, right? Like, do we have a lot more or less committed hunters because they've been out there when hunting was good? Is there something else going on there that's kind of continuing to bolster sort of the number of hunters we have and participation? So I don't know. Those are all sorts of questions we ask.
It's interesting that hunter number of non-residents has gone up so much in the last decade, but you see states like Iowa, Kansas, not so much Illinois. I know there's certain counties where it can be tough to get tags, but it's not like it was 20 years ago. It was, it was a lot harder to get a tag. I feel like back in the day than it is now. You can, for the most part, if you put in as a non-resident, you can get the county you want, but, or the zone or whatever. But, Iowa and then Kansas, Iowa, it might take 5-6 years to draw for certain zones, to draw a tag for an archery, and even firearms, it used to be like you could pretty much count on every other year getting one. Even that's, expanding out to more years. So where are they going to go? They're going to go to the state that, it's over the counter. And, even, Kansas, it's been surprising, is getting harder and harder and harder. So I don't know, man. I totally get the economic side of it and helping our rural communities with an influx of, non-residents coming in and staying and gas and food and all that stuff, restaurants. But if I'm worried about the resource and our residents, the Missouri residents more, certainly I think that's, like you're saying, that's got to be an area that we focus in on, because it's upsetting, just like the turkey thing. Like, they may only kill one of the 2 turkeys, but they're there. They're on the public lands. They're kind of in the way, so to speak, and so I totally see that argument for the whitetail side. I had no idea that the numbers, exploded that much in the last decade, but it makes sense because it's getting so hard to get a tag in these other big buck states that are right next to us.
Yeah. When you look at the cost of hunting some of these other states, I mean, Illinois is like $500 all in for all the different tags and permits that you need.
So I think
we've been making incremental increases to non-resident permit prices. I think, there's kind of 2 things going on sort of globally in, North American hunters, is that we have a declining number of deer hunters in the country, right? Like, we have a declining number of deer hunters in the state of Missouri. We're down to just over 4,000 resident deer hunters.
Really?
We were at 475, close to 500,000 resident deer hunters in like 2012, 2013.
Say that number again. Say that number again. From back then, the number of resident deer hunters to now.
In 2012, 2013 timeframe, we were at like 475, 480,000 resident deer hunters. We're now down to just over 400,000. So that's real.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's playing out in every state across the East. I mean, some of the states have seen dramatic declines, unbelievable numbers. But at the same time, hunters with the means and ability to travel and the financial resources to go other places and hunt, I think has increased. Right. So that's why we see some of the demand on Western hunting opportunities from non-residents, why we're seeing an increased demand on hunting opportunities across much of the Midwest. So I think those 2 same things are playing out and contributing to it. And so we certainly have to respond. It then becomes a real, sort of values-based decision of what's the right spot, what's the right thing to do. Because I've had the opportunity to have conversations with folks from Idaho, right? So folks who hunt elk certainly understand Idaho is one of the last, first come, first serve, over the counter kind of states left. And they found kind of the same kind of pressure, right? As things get limited in other places, they changed that just this year and went to a complete draw. And so I don't want us to be a state that's uninviting to non-residents. I mean, I think it's great. I mean, I was a non-resident for a while, right? Like I lived in the South. I came back and hunted the farm as a non-resident. So I get it. Feeling. But I also get the reality of resident hunters. When you look at the number of non-resident having doubled in the last decade, that's real, right? Like, so we need to figure out what a path forward. Based
on your numbers, we're still lower than what we used to be. So a decade ago, you're around 500,000 hunters, and now we're like 450.
Our total deer hunter numbers is absolutely down, even with an increase in non-residents.
Has the herd dynamic changed that much through that 10-year period as well? Is it about the carrying capacity? Was it always about 1.5 million, or what was the number you had quoted a while ago?
So population's increasing, and the population really is increasing because of growth of deer in South Missouri. Deer populations in South Missouri continue to slowly increase. Deer numbers in North Missouri, probably pretty stable to pretty similar.
What's
So the dynamic
attributing
with it,
the growth down south?
it's folks just continuing to be very conservative in harvest. And it's a longer term trend of much more conservative harvest regulations. So yeah, we have a lot more deer in South Missouri than we ever did before.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I know we've kept you a long time here. Is there anything we didn't cover that we should cover here?
No, I think we hit it, guys. I appreciate the line of questioning. Again, deer management, folks are passionate about it, and I appreciate that. I'm certainly passionate about it. Maybe not as fanatical as some, but care very, very deeply about what happens with management of the whitetail deer resource, and do genuinely want to figure out how we work together to manage this really, really valuable resource, right? Like, this isn't MDC wanting to impose anything on anybody, right? Like, it's us being a facilitator saying, hey, how do we sustain this resource? How do we work together to manage it? How do we recognize these concerns that exist? And how do we do that into the future?
Yeah. And the other thing that I wonder if I just think about, because MDC has to, I've made this point before, MDC has to manage for multi-use ethics. So there are bird watchers, there are backpackers, there are upland game hunters, there are small game hunters, there are anglers. They're managing the resource for everyone. Our Department of Conservation is run by a whitetail biologist. Like that's
which the whitetail drives the majority of the money coming into I would think
it is, but they could just have easily have put in an ornithologist or a hydrologist or whatever. Our entire Department of Conservation is overseen by the executive director, Jason, who is a whitetail biologist, which is a really strong, I think,
that's a positive
indication that there's a real devotion to managing whitetails.
Jason, I lied. I got one more question for you. I've been meaning to ask you this. One more. Have you seen, I'm sure you have, the news articles and regarding Oklahoma and introducing CWD-resistant deer into the population? Is that something you guys, have looked into? Is that something that can even be effective? What type of, reproductive rate do you even have to see in order for that to have any type of effect long term? Do you know much about it yet?
Yeah. So it's one that we've been tracking, for some time. Quite frankly, since this conversation has been around, since CWD emerged and folks are figuring out how to manage it, and recognizing some of the parallels that exist with scrapie and sheep and goats, right? Where there is, some resistance, some lower susceptibility that exists and has been able to be bred into captive populations of sheep and goats. Those sheep and goats over time aren't completely resistant either, though. But that took some pretty dramatic measures inside of sort of a domestic system in which you have great control over all the individuals of the population. So I'm hopeful, right? Like, I want a solution to this thing, and I'm hopeful that we will come to one, and it may very well be a genetic solution. But I think in the Oklahoma scenario, we've got the cart a little bit ahead of the horse in that there hasn't been a lot of transparency in terms of the research done on the genetics behind this. There have been some things, but nobody else has been able to necessarily independently replicate it. So we have some questions. We just want to know what the devil's in the details. And then I think it's a numbers game. Like you said, Matt, it's a huge into a standing free ranging population, the number, because I did genetics work in my graduate research, right? Like, to the number of deer necessary to shift the genetic composition of a herd to institute some resistance or things like that would be astronomical.
Yeah.
So Matt knows.
I'm behind experiment, right? Like, let's try to figure some stuff out. I think we need to work collectively to sort of understand what it is. What do we know? What do we not know, to try to define some of these solutions? But it is not the silver bullet as of yet, right? That some might lead you to believe.
You could see it working in a captive deer herd scenario where you control all the environment and all the deer that are in there. You could see it having maybe an effect in that regard, which CWD seems to be a real issue for the captive deer guys, right? So that's something that I could see having an effect, but I can't imagine how long it would take to inoculate the entire deer herd of Missouri.
Tired buck.
1.5 million deer, and make sure that you change their DNA, how many years and how many deer that would take.
It should be noted that Oklahoma also has a Bigfoot season.
Okay.
So.
I think there's some legitimacy behind the initial concept and the theory, right?
Yeah.
It's the application that becomes problematic.
Yeah.
And what does, when they say, resistance or less susceptibility, what does that actually mean? The stuff that I've seen suggests that they live just a little bit longer. Is that long enough? What are the implications of that? I think they're just continuing questions as to how it would play out. But
if that's 2 or 3 more years, I think that's what you're offsetting, the 2 or 3 years that they're dying earlier because of it in the long run, right? So
right.
But I just thought I've been meaning to ask you that, and so I appreciate you covering that topic.
Yeah, I think there's still lots of questions there.
Yep. Awesome. Well, Tim, do you have anything else for?
No, just Happy New Year. Thanks for jumping on.
Hey, appreciate you guys. Appreciate everything you do. Yeah, have a Happy New Year.
All right. Thank you, Jason. And we enjoy the opportunity to discuss this with you. I don't think you rambled at all in this conversation, much like I've seen on the internet. I appreciate the open letter that you sent out. And I want to thank you for the efforts in being transparent. So appreciate you and the relationship here, and Happy New Year.
DeerCast movement prediction and mapping tools combined with our exclusive virtual rain gauges gets you ahead of your game. We're adding new videos every week, so make sure to click that subscribe button and check out all of our amazing content. This episode of DoD TV is brought to you by DeerCast Maps, waypoints, weather, virtual rain gauges, and more. Every tool you need to get ahead of your game.